welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Pho, founder and editor of KevinMD. Rate and review the show at kevinmd.com/rate, subscribe at kevinmd.com/follow. Today in the show, we have Tony Willoughby. He's a pharmacist and healthcare executive. His latest KevinMD article is titled Automatic Refill and 90-Day Fill Programs Don't Improve Medication Adherence. Tony, welcome to the show.
It was great to be here, Kevin. Thanks for the opportunity to meet and speak.
We'll get into the article in a little bit. First off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a father of 3 boys. I grew up in Kentucky, went to pharmacy school. And when I left pharmacy school, I had done a lot of research during my academic career and found a passion for solving hard problems. So I started progressive leadership roles, first at Target, running pharmacy and clinics. And then I went to McKesson Corporation, where I served as chief pharmacy officer, and continue to always ask myself, how do we improve the patient-provider experience around medication? Because that's my subject matter expertise and that journey. And I got to this question that I kept trying to answer of putting myself in the role of the patient and the physician, and just share a caricature of a story. If we think about how that journey looks today, is a patient goes and sees their physician and they're in an exam room for 15 minutes. And during the first 7 to 10 minutes, there's a good conversation, robust conversation. You get towards the end of the appointment and the physician says, here's the plan. They've gone through the differential within their head. They've got their plan for this patient. They say, here's the prescriptions. I'm going to send them to your pharmacy. I'm going to give you a couple key messages about those medications. And then they always ask the same question, which is, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Right. And 90% of the time, the answer in that moment from the patient is what?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Because they've gone through this whole anxiety buildup of this appointment, new news, new labs, new diagnosis. They've just been given inundated a ton of information, and they say no. And then they go through checkout, they go to their car, and about 3/4 of the way to the car, all the questions start flooding.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they go to Dr. Google and they start getting scared. Then they go to the local pharmacy and somebody comes to the counter and tells them it's going to be 2 hours or too much or not covered or all this other information. If they stick through that process, they come back and somebody comes back to the counter and says, do you want to speak to the pharmacist? And how many people say yes to that? A smattering, right? And if they do, a pharmacist comes over who's understaffed, compressed, not working at the top of their license, and they pull the little bottle out, they turn it sideways and they turn it and they read the warning labels, and then they send them home.
Yeah.
So the physicians give them the key warnings. They've Googled a bunch of scary stuff, and a pharmacist gives them a bunch of warnings, and then we'll say, we'll see you in 90 days. And we wonder why people don't engage with their healthcare.
Sure.
And so I was wrestling with that question along my journey. And I said, I got to stop advising people how to fix this and dare greatly and go try to fix it myself. And that's what got me connected through historical relationships to the group at Catalyst Health Group, for us to wake up every day as one component of our population health solution and start answering that, because it's frustrating to the patient, the caregiver, to the physician, who does all this work and care to set up this plan for the patient. And time after time, that patient comes back in 120, 160,
Sure.
180 days, and they've not progressed, not because the plan was wrong, but because the patient hadn't been able to stay connected to the plan for a bevy of reasons, because you put all this work as a physician into the patient, and then you let them loose out into the wild.
Yeah.
And the system doesn't maintain that continuity of care. And that just seems, when I say it in that caricature version, it goes, why would we ever do that?
Yeah.
And so we've worked really hard, and it's become a passion of progressively trying to answer that question. So pharmacist by training, problem solver by trade. Having 3 teenage boys helps bring a lot of problems to the fold.
Yeah.
But that's what we've worked really hard to continue to take that big question and try to answer it.
Sure. So one of the problems that certainly you recognize is medication adherence. And your Kevin MD article, we talk about one aspect of that. Automatic refill and 90-day fill programs don't improve medication adherence. But before you talk about your article, just to give some context. So talk about the context of automatic refills and 90-day fill programs, just for those who just aren't familiar to how common that is.
A lot of our quality measurements that look at adherence are claim-based measurements, right? And we are a metric-driven world for all the right reasons. And every time there's a right reason, there's a shadow to that. And so the best way to drive that metric in the most facile, convenient way is to have to think about it less times a year.
Yeah.
So if my measure of adherence is you're on a drug, you've had a claims process to cover that time period, then if I only have to worry about that 4 times a year instead of 12 times a year, it's more efficient. It's more efficient operationally. We think it's more convenient to the patient, et cetera. And if it's an auto refill, even better. Nobody has to worry about it. It just runs. And then we get really enamored if we, in a CMS space, if we look at our star ratings, et cetera, of seeing this improvement line. Well, it's because we've automated systems to build that measure. We haven't addressed the core underlying problem, because a lot of your audience, whether physician or patient, if they've ever been in a caregiver role at the end of life, they've gone to the home as part of the closure, and they've gone to the kitchen pantry and they've opened it, and all those automatic refills are still in the pantry. Right. So we drive adherence to improve quality of life, and we know drugs work when people take them, and we have medications because today, when you think about chronic disease, it's the most common solution. That's another podcast, whether it should be or not, but it is today, right? And then we use systems to generate the transaction of that, but not the true engagement to get the benefit out of the medication.
So what are the biggest reasons, just from your perspective, why people have those automatic refills, say, in the pantry, just piling up? What are the biggest barriers from your perspective that prevents optimal patient adherence to medications?
I think it's human nature. It's not about adherence, about drugs, right? If you think about being a pharmacist, and when I was in pharmacy school, kinetics was one of my favorite classes. I'm a little bit of a nerd deep inside. And I think about drug dosing, how we dose drugs, right? We dose drugs, we get a peak, we try to keep it above a certain concentration level. And once it falls below, we dose again, right? That should resonate with all your clinicians. Human behavior is the same way. You go to the physician's office, you got a new lab, you got a new diagnosis, you got a new opportunity to sit and talk to your physician and learn from him or her. Your engagement goes way up. And then you go home. And that dose starts falling under this minimum engagement. When we think about other programs, you get a trainer in a gym. Would you ever pay and go to a trainer and go and get a workout plan and then look at him or her and say, I'll see you in 90 to 120 days, and think that that would stick? But we've decided that medications is our answer for chronic disease, but we built systems that allow you to come in, we give you 90 days, and then say, go figure it out. I don't think it's a medication adherence problem. I don't think it's a human behavior problem. We're not going to fix that behavior. It's just going to get worse and worse because of our attention spans as individuals in the fast-paced world. What we've forgotten about is, how do we use collision points to keep pulse dosing engagement? Medication adherence is about medication engagement and about patient engagement and empowered self-care, more so than all the transactional tools we try to solve it with.
So tell us some stories or case studies of how we could increase that engagement, because what you've been talking about pretty much describes my life as an internal medicine primary care doctor. I have patients come back every 3 to 6 months. We have automatic refills go until then. I see them in 6 months. I give them another 6 months of refills, and then that cycle keeps perpetuating. So tell us about some of your solutions. Tell us about how we can improve that engagement in between visits.
I want to pull on that thread you introduced there. We talk a lot about the impact this has on our solution that I'll describe on quality of life of the patient. we also think it has a huge impact on quality of life across our provider spectrum. From a point of empathy, if I put myself in your shoes, the frustration of I set a plan and I have plan one, and I've got this stair step of plans I'm going to take this patient through, but each time they come back, it's Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Because stair step one was never fully executed by the patient. No matter how much I advise, care, and passionately plea, it's just a frustrating part in our healthcare system in total. And that's part of the trying to solve. It's not blame on the system or individuals in the system. It's kind of just culture, a view of it's a system that's flawed. How do we work together, not point at the individuals within it to solve it? So what we try to take advantage of is the dynamic of the medication, not seeing that medication is a hindrance or adherence is a hindrance or there's non-compliant patients, but using the transaction to drive points of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I don't like the idea of 90-day fills, because it erodes the frequency of the connection with the patient.
Sure.
So in our model, we have to improve convenience because we all want convenience in our lifestyle, but we wrap in clinical interaction to all those what we call moments that matter. So if we go back to my caricature at the beginning, during that last few minutes of that physician interaction with the patient, when they give the medications, instead of asking, do you have any questions? They say, I'm going to connect you to a pharmacist who works side by side with me, who can help answer your questions in perpetuity. Right? And they bond that connection. Those pharmacists work trusted advisor relationships panels, not just with their physicians, but also with the patient. So there's this trust triad that begins to form with those groups. And then we use a natural rhythm and cadence of what's common across chronic condition patients' medications to allow those synchronized points of the transactional component to wrap around other clinical interventions with it. And then there's a base frame there because they're empaneled and they know who their physician is and they know who their pharmacist is, that they have free reign access when they're early in the morning and they forgot to take a dose and they don't know what to do, to on-demand connect to one of those trusted members of that triad that they're working with. So I'm a pharmacist, so I can critique this. A lot of pharmacists, well, we label pharmacists, community pharmacists and clinical pharmacists.
Yeah.
We're all clinicians, right? So why do we even in our own industry separate the two? And a lot of our pharmacists that will say, I'm a clinical pharmacist, like to divorce themselves from the product. I don't do dispensing, that's something else. I would argue that it's one of the only places in the healthcare ecosystem where patients have to interact for something concrete in exchange. So instead of seeing that as a barrier, how do you see that as a gift to drive patient engagement behavior? So we use all those little moments around a transaction to have a clinical interaction that's really a patient empowerment engagement interaction.
So from a practical standpoint, will that patient then have an app, a 1-800 number? How would that patient get in touch with that pharmacy consultant that you're talking about?
Yeah, we like to meet patients where they're at. So we have multimodal approaches. We have an app to empower that for those that work that way. Those that want to pick up a telephone and talk, we can do that. Those that want to asynchronous chat, want to email. When I first started doing adherence research 10 or 15 years ago, everybody's looking for the silver bullet of what drives adherence. And the answer is all of the above, none of the above type answer, right? It's multimodal and it's highly personal. What motivates each person. And also how we each like to communicate is individual. So we try to meet patients where they're at and give them flexibility of those answers. And so we're expressing convenience in that way, not trying to speed them up through the queue to rush the transaction.
Sure. We're talking to Tony Willoughby. He's a pharmacist and healthcare executive. We're talking about his latest KevinMD article titled Automatic Refill and 90-Day Fill Programs Don't Improve Medication Adherence. Tony, so tell me about some of the outcomes from your intervention. How does it improve patient care?
Yeah, that's great. We look at it as a journey of an equation. First, we look at engagement. What's the repeatability of the engagement with the patient? Once we see engagement start to solidify, we see adherence start to improve.
Mm-hmm.
As we see adherence start to improve, we see clinical markers begin to improve. And as clinical markers begin to improve, lo and behold, utilization and cost improve. It's actually pretty linear, predictable, and almost happens in these 30 to 60-day increments as you start to see each of those measurements start to improve.
Sure.
So we have a high retention rate in the model with patients. It's around 98% that we see a retention rate. We see key clinical adherence improve. Usually, if you look at the traditional PDC measures, we'll see average adherence rates in the low 90 percentile. We'll break that measure. If we call a patient and they've had a tough month and they didn't take all their metformin, we're not auto shipping them to manipulate a measure. We're going to meet the patient where they're at. So we're happy with that range that we're in. And as we see that engagement improve, we see clinical markers like A1C, hypertension, hyperlipidemia measures improve. And then on average, we'll see a 15 to 25% change in total cost of care after we've stabilized patients over an 8 to 12 month period. These are chronic condition patients that have higher total cost of care than the typical healthy patient. So there's a bigger number to cause reduction off of, but we'll see $200 to $300 PMPM reductions in cost. And we see it consistently. We've measured it a bunch of ways, bunch of different times in different patient populations. And when patients engage in their own healthcare and take their medications as prescribed by their physician, it works. We're not doing anything special. We're just driving engagement to the plan that the physician puts in place.
And my final question, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Whether it's my own kids at home or the audience itself, we live in a fast-paced world. And technology is fantastic. And we should use it in the moments that it makes sense to accelerate to gain efficiencies. And we should also slow down in important moments and listen to the people that we're caring for to really hear them. Because it's easy to rush to, I'm going to give you a pill reminder, or I'm going to send you a text, or I'm going to do that. But a lot of times a patient will heal themselves if you listen to them long enough and find out what really matters to them, and you can solve it. And each human's unique. And so just the take home that we learn over and over again is that when we slow down and listen in key moments and hear what the patient or the physician is saying from a feedback of a system, that's when we make incremental improvements for that human or for that client or anybody in any relationship.
Tony, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. Enjoyed it.